The editorial board is the 26 district candidates. We'll give you each 2 minutes to introduce yourself and then launch into some questions. We'll let Larry go first. You're the incumbent.
Sure. Are you going to? So I'm Larry Seaquist, and I live in Gig Harbor with my wife Carla, who's a writer, playwright and writer, publishes on Huffington Post. 2 reasons are behind my energies and enthusiasm for running again. I was born in a generation when we knew 2 things for sure. We knew that if you worked hard and got a good education, that the future was open to you. And we knew that America was fundamentally on the right track. If you worked hard and you got an education and everybody worked together, we were on the right track. The reason I'm running again, because neither of those 2 things are true. If you are a young, poor person today, the statistics of you getting an education like I did, I was the first of 5 kids in a very poor farm family. We were dirt poor farmers. And it was still open. You could still work your way through college and end up with a reasonable career. That's not true now. And our voters here in the 26th district, when we survey them, more than 2/3 of them think that this country is on the wrong track, and about 1/3 more also talk about the economy problems. So my focus is on those 2 things. Bad politics that have fenced out the voters who feel like we're on the wrong track, and education. So I look forward to talking to you about some specifics of what we can do to restart our economy by really accelerating what we're achieving in education and by changing the way we do politics so that people feel like they are participating.
We'll touch on those.
Well, I want to first thank the board for having me on. I am Doug Richards, running for state representative in 26, position 2. Most of you met me before, several not, but just in case, I'll go through my bio for you. Been in the area for over 34 years. We moved here in 1978 as a kid. I'm a child of 5 kids from my parents. I moved up from Tacoma, and I've been in the Port Orchard, Olalla area since. I'm currently raising my family out there. Got 4 kids, ages 11 to 21. Oldest is getting married right after the election, so this is a busy time of year for both of us. My wife and I have been married for over 20 years out there, and we are just excited to be part of the political process. We've learned so much in the last couple of years, been in the community and been able to reach out to people, find out really what it means to be a community member, to be part of the community, not only from a volunteer perspective, but also from being out and seeing the needs and some of the struggles of the people in the community. And let's face it, we are facing some struggles today in our, not only our state economy, our community economy, and our country's economy. And so we want to get involved. And I bring a lot of service, about 25 years of service to my community or country. Started in the United States Navy, went to the fire service where I currently serve as battalion chief with South Kitsap Fire Rescue, and had a U.S. Coast Guard reserve time. In that service, I learned that it's about giving back to the community. And so my family and I are taking this challenge to the next level to be the next state representative of the 26th district. And we're looking forward to taking on those challenges. We want to focus on 2 things. We think it's kids and the economy. We recognize that in order to get things moving again, we're going to have to focus on the economy and the small business community. And then secondly, we're going to have to focus on the kids and make sure that their educational system is working. So I'll look forward to your issues, and I'll look forward to your questions. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, it sounds like we've got a topic in common. I'm going to ask one more question. It kind of follows up on what you mentioned in your introduction. You ran 2 years ago. Actually, it's a rematch of 2 years ago. Tell me what's changed for you in 2 years. What have you studied? What have you learned? How are you a different candidate now than you were the last time you tried it for this?
Absolutely. I think it's a maturing process. There's a little naivety, I think, when you get into politics. You think it's what you read on the Sunday paper. But when you actually dig into it, you find that it's a little bit more in depth. And over the last couple of years, as I've been involved in the community, whether with the Rotary groups that I've been involved with, the school system, I recognize that the challenges that most of the community faces right now are economic challenges. Budgets are being restrained, whether local government within the fire service, it's my trade, we recognize that our revenues are shrinking, school districts' revenues are shrinking. We recognize that families, their revenues are shrinking because they're either underemployed or unemployed. And so because of that, what makes me a different candidate this time around is I have the experience, not only from being on the ground, the boots on the street experience, but I also have the experience from being out and active in the community this time around. And then I've looked up and really studied hard on the issues, looked at a lot of different policies that could be either reformed, changed, or implemented to help get us out of the hole we're in.
Similar question, maybe what in the last biennium, how are you doing? Anything that's changed about you, your attitudes?
Absolutely. Two things. When I talked to you 2 years ago, I had just finished 4 years in the legislature where my principal focus, in addition to budgets, was healthcare. I don't remember what we talked about 2 years ago, but I'm sure I talked a lot about healthcare. Right after the election, I was appointed to be the chair of House Higher Education, continued on budget committees in education. So my personal focus has completely shifted away from healthcare to higher ed. I spend all of my time working with universities, colleges, and education leaders around the state. And then personally, what I've realized is if we're actually going to do things in this state, we have to do them on a bipartisan basis. So I am a radically more bipartisan person than I was 2 years ago. And I'd be happy to, just for example.
Yeah, give me an example.
Example, I was driving in here, coming through Gorst on the phone, talking with my friend and my ranking member, the number 2 on a committee is called the ranking, the Republican. On the minority side, it's Larry Haler from Tri-Cities. He did a good job yesterday, defeated a right-wing opponent, called him to congratulate him and to schedule him and me to work together with 3 UW regents on where we're going with higher ed. So I religiously work a higher ed agenda on a bipartisan basis, even to the point that if you see us on TVW on camera, you can't tell who the D's and the R's are because I've mixed them together. They don't sit on one side or the other. They sit mixed in with each other. I have teams of R&D people working together during the interim. If you're going to get anything done in the legislature, it's going to be on a bipartisan basis.
You sound kind of optimistic about that when you phrase it.
Oh, yeah.
Your actions lead me to believe you were pretty frustrated that the legislature went into another extended session this year. This is the kind of thing that maybe would stop that from happening in the future. And I'd like an explanation on how are you going to
I don't want to get you guys too deep into budget tech talk, except that that's where we need to go to answer that question. The legislature right now, to my great frustration, remember that I'm a budget guy. When I wasn't at sea in command of warships, I was in the Pentagon leading budget development, budget and strategy for Secretary Cheney and people before him. And the way in which we are doing budgets in the Washington State Legislature is still the old-fashioned budget done in the back room by a few people who are talking with the lobbyists. That's very bad government. And I have been increasingly frustrated. So what I'm doing right now with our staff is actually re-engineering a new budget process. I will propose, if I'm fortunate enough to be re-elected, pour a separate education budget so we can split that, more than $10 billion out and see it. So you've got to re-engineer the way the legislature does business. It is okay to have partisanship. Larry Haler, my ranking, and I were just talking about this as we put together a higher ed agenda. We won't agree on everything, but we agree on the goals. And we'll figure out a way that when we get to the means, which means money, we'll figure out a way where by the end of the session we'll vote on the same side.
What are the goals you agree on?
The most important goal in education for this state is that we rapidly increase our educational attainment, meaning that the number of people with certificates, 2-year or 4-year degrees or graduate degrees in the state has to increase. This state is a radically undereducated state. Believe it or not, only 40% to 40.9% of our citizens in Washington State have anything more than a high school diploma, and it's getting worse. Our 25-year-olds are 10% less educated than their parents, and in the last 10 years, the entire educational attainment of Washington State went down 1.5%. Now, you can't survive as an economy. You can't survive as a society if you're becoming less educated. So that's what we all agree on. The question is, how are we going to get there?
You agree with that?
I don't. I disagree. I think that the numbers can be manipulated on the statistics. If you think about it, Washington State is ranked in the top 10 of people who, the populace, have degrees of some sort. And really, I think it's a fundamental difference of, and this is one of the contrasts of myself and Larry, is the idea that I think it starts with the K through 12 system. I think that part of the reason you're seeing less enrollment in the higher education is because their achievement scores are becoming less qualified to get them into college. We're seeing that there's more and more remedial math courses taken just so that they can get in through the college entrance exams. The other issue is the rising cost of college. College costs have gone up significantly in the last couple of years because we've untied the hands of the tuition setting for the colleges. I think if you want to focus on getting the economy turned back around, we need to focus on getting our K through 12 education system up and running again. That's producing kids that are A, eligible for college, B, eligible for trade school, or C, want to go directly into the workplace. Like in this great city here, we have Peterson Naval Shipyard, has their own apprenticeship program and so forth. So to say that higher education is going to dig us out of this hole, I think it's erroneous. I think what's going to get us out of this hole is get the economy moving again. If we want to get the economy moving again, we need to get a workforce that's trained. We need to train that workforce. I think the K through 12, it's the foundation. Then we can move on to higher education. It really does need the addressing that Larry's talking about.
Real quickly, Larry was talking about a change in budget policy so that education is its own separate thing. And I've heard this from a few other people. This is seemingly it's becoming a popular idea. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. This is one of the things we talked about last cycle. I talked about funding education first, and I was told it was a cheap trick. It's not. We have a separate budget for transportation. We have a separate budget for capital. In our organization, we have a capital funding program for our fire apparatus. We need to make sure that we set aside education funds, adequately fund it, and then move on in the budget process. And we need to fund it first.
Is this something your caucus is going to do? Or you feel like you're alone on this one? I mean, definitely the Republicans have said they want to do this before.
We'll have a struggle in the legislature, both among the Republicans and among the Democrats in the legislature, about whether or not to do that. This will not be an easy sell. But the idea of this funding education first idea is fundamentally nonsensical, frankly. If you know anything about budgets, though, talk about the transportation budget, we don't make those final choices about the last dollar going to the last most important thing until the end. The most important decisions are made at the end of the budget process. The important thing is that we split out, in my view, that we split out the education budget so we can see the balance between early learning, K-12, and higher ed. It's not one or the other. And right now we're involved in a struggle in Olympia that I spend a good deal of time when I'm not campaigning in Olympia right now on education budgets. You remember the McCleary decision was the Supreme Court decision that said this legislature is not, quote, fully funding, amply funding education, K-12 education. So we wrote a bill to require a group, a task force, to work during the summer. That bill, over my objections, was written very narrowly to address only K-12. It's not looking at early learning or higher ed. So finally, last Friday in that meeting, I said, I'm now going to create a parallel group to work on higher education ed funding so that we end up, I need to merge back, by October or so, with what we're going to do in higher education funding and how that fits in K-12. But we've got to do the whole thing.
Is the early learning part of it?
Absolutely. I think everybody.
But you rank that as a third priority, is that?
Oh, no.
Okay.
If you had only $1 today to add to education, I would put it on early learning first. The bang for the buck is very high there, and we're radically underfunded. You know, we've got our state ECAP program, the federal Head Start, but we're reaching way less than half of the children in the state.
Could you give us, and I want both you guys actually,
Sure.
because this came up in another one of our meetings. I know Larry's real interested in just in understanding your definition of early learning.
Oh.
And maybe since Doug is saying K-12 is a priority, also
Sure.
as a secondary question, do you consider early learning part of that system? Is all-day kindergarten part of that system? I'd like both of you to kind of tackle
Well,
that.
I believe the jury's still out on all-day kindergarten. We still need to be able to work with the local school districts and find out if that's going to be effective within the community, within the school district. However, the early learning is absolutely part of the educational process. As we see kids entering the school system that don't know their alphabet, I mean, that puts them at a significant disadvantage when they enter into K through 12, and especially the K through 3 time frame when they should be learning how to read. And so pre-K or early learning is going to be an absolute necessity. And there are statistics to show that it really reduces not only poverty levels, but it reduces incarceration levels, other things that the society spends money on the back end just by implementing an early learning system. So the bang for the buck there is definitely there. We're just going to have to include it in the basic education package.
Now, you need to understand, we're dealing here with the Constitution and what the words that were written in 1889 say, and whether or not the definition, this is a very important question for the citizens and the voters, do we formally try to move early learning into that definition of basic education? I say yes. The budget guys are terrified by that because the cost is very high. As soon as you put it inside the formal definition, we have written bills to try to move in that direction. Hasn't happened yet. So this what's in that area of is it in quote basic or not is one of the political struggles going on. But the importance, 2 months ago or so, just before the end of the school year, I spent a morning here in one of our elementary schools with a kindergarten teacher who explained that she could on day one tell how poor the family was that sent that kid by whether the kid could talk when they walked into kindergarten, first day. And she can see the need for that pre-K early learning experience, especially for families that are in poverty.
Is it your opinion that it should be part of that?
Yes,
Definition of
absolutely. It's so important. Now, the dividing line is say, well, is it age 5 or is it age 4 or is it age 2 or 3? You know, how far do you go? Pretty soon, over in Tri-Cities in Pasco, there's a program called Ready with an exclamation point, where they actually go in. It's a community-funded operation. They go to the hospital, and when the mother has the baby, they give them the reading materials and the instruction for the mother, father, and every year they update that. So their definition over there in Tri-Cities is from the day of birth.
You put education funding at the top of the list, whether it includes the early learning, vocational
Yes.
education, university, both kind of seems like you both want to do that. But then you're going to get to the end of the budget and something else has to get squeezed.
So here's the
You've done a lot of that.
arithmetic.
Yeah, give me the arithmetic from both of you.
The arithmetic right now is with the current projections and assuming that the Europeans don't pull the rug out from under the world's economy, is that by January we will begin the session, I hope to be there, with about $800 million of red ink, mostly because of growing healthcare costs. And the price tag of the K-12 McCleary decision in its narrow formal framework is about $1 billion. So standing in the queue right behind the $800 million of red ink and $1 billion of K-12 costs are me. I'd like to spend $500 million to $1 billion in higher ed, and transportation is going to be there with an enormous bill. So we're going to have a real struggle in the next legislature about priorities, and do we go to the voters and ask them for more money?
And what's your
My
answer
answer
to that
is yes. So what I'm doing right now is to try to build a menu of what could we buy in higher ed? Do we buy down tuition? Do we increase high-tech, high employability? What do we do? And is that a package of things that seems compelling to the voter?
And you see it going to the voters as an income tax? Or another?
Right now, my focus is on what we would buy. Now, my short answer, I don't mean to dominate the conversation here, my shorter answer is not, we need tax reform. I've been saying the same thing since the first day I ran 6.5 years ago.
Okay, let's get to that one in just a second. Give Doug a chance.
I think Big Larry really defined the contrast. He said he was looking for things to buy, and really that's why we're in the situation we're in as a state and economy. If you look at revenue streams, they've gone up by about 25% since 2005-06 biennium. So it's not like we're taking in less money. We're bringing in more money than we ever have in the state of Washington. Taxpayers are maxed out right now because they're either underemployed or unemployed, and yet we're talking about buying more things. At a certain point within our own personal lives, we recognize that we outgrow our revenue. We're going to have to stop doing something. And as a state, we're going to have to focus on what are we doing, is it effective, what can we reform? And when we look at that, we're also going to look at the backside of that and go, how do we then pay for what we already have? I think we have to grow our way out of this. If we grow our way out of the recession, it's going to produce even more revenues. The temptation, though, is to buy more things. We cannot do that. We cannot succumb to that temptation again. What we're going to have to do is, as we grow out of this economy and as revenue starts to come back in and projections show in the next few years we reach that point, we need to fully fund the programs that we already have if they're effective and they're efficient and they're providing the services that the community wants.
You mentioned earlier you have to stop doing something. What is that something?
I'm sorry.
You said earlier in your answer, you said that, when you're balancing these out, you may have to stop doing something.
Yes, you may have to.
What are your, when you have to answer that question, how do you?
Yeah, one of the ones right off the top of my head is I'm 100% for privatizing workers' compensation. I think that it's shown effective in the other states. We're one of 4 states that still to try to compete in that. And just last week in the Seattle Times, there was an article, a great article, that showed that there's going to be an increase between 7.8 and 28.6%. Business owners can't take that right now. They are fighting to keep their doors open, and yet we're going to pile on top of them a workers' comp increase based upon our desire to keep them a monopoly in the state. And so things like that are going to have to seriously be looked at in order for us to accomplish getting the economic engine moving again.
Larry, when you started, you said this is already something you're starting to think about, starting to talk about, tax reform or a different way of doing the budget.
Right.
You want to explain what you're talking about there?
Yeah, and we also talk about what to cut. If you'd like to talk about that at some point, that's where I work a lot.
What do you mean? What does that mean?
What things to cut? There's a very list of very specific things. And your paper often reports on my energies about attacking the ferry system. We just got through building 3 of the most expensive ferries in history that we may have to throw away because they're too expensive to operate. The same day that they cut their seagoing cruise, the ferry system kept hiring executives. Down at Western State Hospital, where they used to have 1 nurse on a ward, they now have 2 layers of supervisors, a supervisor for the nurses and a supervisor for the supervisor. And the only place they cut was in the nurses actually provide direct care. This whole Washington management system of more than 4,000 executives. So we need to keep streamlining, downsizing the total state government radically. There is a lot to be done there, particularly in DSHs, to make things more efficient. And we can make the school system, the education system, much more efficient. Right now, if you're a 9th grader here in our schools, the Bremerton School District is a little better, but overall statewide, only about 18% of our freshmen in high school will actually get a bachelor's degree because they're lost by the wayside. We're still losing 25% of those people. Now that's wasted money. The remedial education at the community college is a huge drain on our economy, on our budgets.
What's taken so long to define those reforms? It seems like we have a lot of candidates who come in, and sometimes if they're an incumbent, they'll say, well, we already cut. And you're saying there's still expensive ferries, there's still too many managers. I mean, you're the party that's been in charge down there.
Yep. And we have not been able, between the legislature and the chain of command that runs the ferry system, have been remarkably resistant to change. I keep working on it.
This is a more general question. I just wanted to hear from Doug, because Larry, we've reported this a lot of times.
Sure.
The different things you've done on the ferries. It's obviously a priority to you. I haven't heard a lot about what your perspective is on the ferry system, what you're interested in it, so I just wanted to give you a chance to do that.
Well, the ferry system is obviously an important part of this community, part of the Kitsap Peninsula. I believe the ferry system is definitely part of that state highway system. If you're looking at mobility, freight mobility, and you're looking at congestion, the ferry system is a key part of that. We'd be definitely fooling ourselves if we thought we wanted to. I've heard people say they want to privatize it. There's not a privatized model right now that mimics what we're doing with our ferry system that will work like that. There are areas of our system that we can privatize. I'd be a proponent of privatizing areas in the architectural development for terminals and so forth like that. And I think some of the similar reforms that have been suggested recently in the paper, and I think it was Linda Smith was asking for some of those reforms. I think the governor's got a good group together working on that. But one of the interesting things that I spoke about last time that we didn't get much traction, but is starting to get traction this time, as I said, we just need to listen to the labor groups. And I know that the union right now has sometimes a negative connotation to it, but these labor groups put together a coalition paper talking about some of the reforms in the ferry system. And one of the things that I've done, whether it was with my small business, when I own a small business, or whether it's in the fire service, it's the boots on the street that really know how to fix the system, because they're the ones out delivering the service. And this union coalition that put together this paper addressing the issues in the ferry system, they're just asking for things to be run a little more efficiently, to be done on time, and to implement some reforms that will actually work because they can see it in action. And I think there needs to be more attention paid to those type of coalitions. And so I'm a proponent of the ferry system, but I do want to key in on one thing. We often say that we're an advocate for the ferry system, or I've worked hard on the ferry system. Things haven't got better. Let's face it, in the last 6 years, we've ordered the boats that aren't working. We're talking now about throwing them away. I mean, throwing away $68 million boats because of our errors, that should be just turning our taxpayers' stomachs. And so, who's been in charge of this? I mean, you got to ask yourself, who is the one that has been leading the charge here and not been paying attention to what's going on within the system and fixing some of these problems that need to be done? It'd be too easy to sit here and point fingers, but we have to really ask ourselves, is there true reform going on in the ferry system? And I think there isn't at this point. I think we have to look at some of these reports that I was talking about and actually implement. It's time to get to work and implement, not just talk about it.
Can we just clarify the throwaway statement?
Yeah.
Because I don't want that to get where we've thrown these away. Explain what you meant when you said that, please.
The 364s that were built for the special boats, the small ones that were built for the Port Townsend Keystone Run, are turning out to be extremely expensive. They got very large engines that were actually built for a different boat, and they're turning out to be very expensive to operate. And this is the Eileen class, the ferries that have a built-in list. The one down on the port, on the Vashon, south end of Vashon, Point Defiance to Tahlequah, in order to keep the engines running fast enough to avoid stack fires, they actually have to run an extra length, a dog leg inside the run, so they can run the thing faster, and while pushing back with the forward engine of the push-push transit. We are at a place where, as fares keep going higher and higher, we've got to ask ourselves, can we afford to continue using those 64s? Do they need to be modified with different engines so that they're more suitable to the route? or should we look to sell them? What I'm proposing specifically is that we redo the master plan. There is a master plan which stops after building the two 144s that we're in contract for right now. 2 more spectacularly expensive boats. We just can't keep going down that road. We've got new technologies in engines, hulls. I think we need to rethink what our ferry system is, and that's my particular proposal.
How do you rethink what it is? What do you mean?
What you do is put together a skunk works of not only hull engineers. I've talked with, for example, Art Anderson, folks here, Eric Anderson and his engineers. We have talked regularly. They've introduced me to a Boeing engineer who does hydrofoils and airplanes. There are new hull technologies, new engine technologies. We need to rethink the routes. We know that our history is in the mosquito fleet. If we were running smaller, faster, cheaper boats, cheaper to build and cheaper to run, we might be able to change the network and make it much more effective. So what you need is a skunk works with designers and with business and route people looking at what that rethinking of a ferry system could be like. And I will propose that if I'm elected, that's what we do next.
Do you guys want to ask a question here?
Well, Larry's got one.
Well,
Go ahead.
getting back to this early education,
Right.
what exactly do you mean? Are you talking about preschool for all kids in the state before kindergarten for 1, 2, or 3 years? What's the vision of early education?
Sure.
The absolute minimum starting place is all day K. That inside the K-12 system, every school district in the state would be able to offer all day K. And that's a place where, for example, here in Bremerton, they've been able to hang on to nearly all day K. Down in Peninsula School District in Gig Harbor, they're doing half day K with no Friday. That's where the budget has pulled them back. So minimum is all day K. Then you look at the success of Head Start and ECAP, where you're taking your 4 or 5 year olds. So for 1 or 2 years before kindergarten, they would have this educational experience.
Is that your vision too?
A little bit different. My vision is to let the districts determine within their funding mechanism all day K or half day K. My vision was more on the pre-K. And right here in Bremerton, they have also a plan for pre-K, which by implementing some of those dollars and allowing people to opt into it, so it's not required, it was an opt-in, they bring their child down. They saw a 65% increase in literacy as they walked in the door in kindergarten. And those are the kind of services that we need to offer that show tangible metrics that we can use and define and see a good use of our tax dollar.
And the other question I have, then I'll pass on the baton, is the higher education. I hear a lot of people complain about the cost of our universities. You see any way of helping our citizens, children get into school with these high tuition costs they're facing?
One of the ways to help is to go back to a system where the legislature has to set that tuition setting authority. I think that should set at the legislature. Secondly, if we are going to fund them, we're going to have to find the revenue stream to fund them additionally and to fund additional scholarships or whatever it may be to bring those tuition costs down, financial aid, state financial aid. However, what we haven't talked about in this editorial board, and which is concerning to me, is we're talking about programs that we want to fund, but we're doing nothing about fixing the economy, which brings the revenue stream in to actually fund these programs. And I think that's where we have to turn our focus. We have to turn our focus upon getting that economic engine moving again. I mean, everybody here knows the typical mantra, 70% of all businesses in Washington, actually 96% of all employees work at a small business location in Washington State, and that's 51 or less. If we're going to get this economic engine rolling, we're going to have to do things that help small business community get back on their feet, keep their doors open, start employing people, and that will free up the revenue streams. People working actually will be giving into the system instead of being in unemployment and taking out of the system. It's a simple economics equation. We have to do things from a policy standpoint to get our small business community moving again.
So give some specifics on how you get the small businesses going.
Okay, I explained one of them, workers' comp, that those rates going up next year are going to close many doors in our community, and they can't afford that. Second is regulatory relief. I'll give you an example. I have an individual in our community who's trying to open a convenience store on a corner of Molnix and Highway 16. Because of regulation, he was able to build it. He worked within the county requirements and state requirements. And then at the 11th hour, they said, DOT came to him and said, you're going to have to implement an acceleration lane. And so in order to put that acceleration lane on Molnix to get onto the highway, it ate up a couple extra 100 square feet of ground, putting him over a limit that now he has to triple the cost of his stormwater management to do that project. And so now that project's on hold for a year until they can figure out if that's DOT land or is that his land, and is it so written in stone that he can't have an extra couple hundred feet to get things moving along.
But how do you solve that problem?
Well, how we solve that problem is we help. Think about this. If I was planning that project and there was better liaison and county DOT connections to be able to bring this to them up front, you wouldn't be doing this at 11th hour. You would have a better opportunity for him to know what the regulations were up front. Permitting is another issue, the cost of permitting. I'll give you another example. There's a gentleman who is removing pilings, removing them out of the salt water here in Port Orchard. Just the cost of the permitting from DOE is the same cost as the project. And so when you look at regulations like that are put on our business, there's no growth there. We're basically robbing Peter to pay Paul in some of these projects or in some of these businesses. And we can't do that any longer.
These are agency regulations. Are you going to try, you're saying that you're going to try and legislate them to change it?
Now you do what our job is as representatives. Is you go down there, you work within the agencies to institute reform. We try to work within the community to help them understand what the regulations are. And then we try to look at what those regulations impacts will be in the future. I think sometimes we throw regulations out there with unintended consequences because we don't understand the impact on the community. You said, what do we do to help small business communities? Regulations is one component of it. It's not the silver bullet of it. Workers' comp is not the silver bullet of it, but anything we can do to help businesses get back on their feet are going to help build that economic engine again.
I'll tell you what the silver bullet is. It's education. I work with Boeing, Microsoft, and the hundreds of aerospace companies. Do you know that right today there are 60,000 open high-tech jobs in this state? The number one reason why people are not building their business here is because they can't hire anybody to fill the job. Pfizer just pulled a pill fill facility out of Seattle, 80-job plant, because they couldn't hire anybody to keep the doors open. They took it back to New Jersey. So if you want to accelerate Washington's economy, this is an absolutely core principle with me.
So get back to my question, how do you make higher education more affordable?
Okay, what you do is we've got to go ask the voters to put more money, because what we did over the last year since September of 2008 when the crash happened is we used higher ed as an ATM. We moved nearly $1 billion out of higher ed and put it elsewhere in the budget. And last year, with my leadership, Derek Kilmer's leadership, and others, we got that stopped. We shut the ATM down. Now we've got to go back, and as a consequence, as the state funding went down, tuition went up. We've got to start pulling it down. Now, it's pricey. For every 1% that we would reduce the increase in tuition, it costed $15.5 million. So if we bought out a 7% rise next year, it would cost us $100 million. If we went to the 50-50, you've heard Rob McKenna talk about getting back to the place where tuition was 50-50. It used to be that tuition was 1/3, state put 2/3 in. Now it's flipped. The state's only putting about 1/3 in system-wide. We've got 6 universities and 34 community and technical colleges. If we went to where Rob is suggesting, which is a sensible thing to do, The price tag is $1 billion a biennium. We don't have that money. So where's it going to come from? We're going to have to go to the voters and say, are you willing to put that kind of money into higher education so that you can feed these businesses with the kinds of skills that they're asking for? That's close to being the most important single question facing the state today.
I'd like to ask about tax reform. You were talking earlier about tax reform. Tell us what you would do.
You have to, but you've got to do tax reform as a comprehensive package. This idea that you add an income tax or you subtract one tax exemption, you know, these little technical fixes. We've got a tax system that is end-to-end a bad system. The B&O tax is a crazy system that makes it difficult to do business. The way we do sales tax is strongly regressive, and the whole system of those two taxes, with property taxes, is very volatile. So as the economy swings, those revenue streams go up. There was a headline in the paper this morning or yesterday about school districts seeing now a stable funding and how much less expensive it is to run the same budget next year as you had this year. So we've got to overhaul the whole tax system. The only thing we've got on the table is Bob Gates Sr.'s study, remember about 5 or 6 years ago. We're going to have to do some kind of public, that you can't do in the legislature. You're going to have to go to the public with some kind of mechanism. What I've written, I've actually got a bill, it's still alive technically in the legislature, that would create a Brack-like commission, and it would look at all the exemptions on the same way that the government, the way DOD closes down bases with this independent commission. So something like that has to be done. But frankly, there is not yet any political will in our state to tackle that. I talk about it in my caucus, but whether it's Democrats, Republicans, or either of our two governor candidates, nobody right now is willing to step up and tackle fundamental tax reform. We have to do that.
You really think you can convince the general public of raising taxes? Because whenever taxes come up, invariably you got the Tim Hymans out there and everybody, and
Yep.
California Proposition 13 and on
You
and
know,
on and on.
In the other day in the campaign, I ran a telephone town hall. It's rather than doing these kind of mailers, I did. We dialed 20,000 phones, so it saved a heck of a lot of money, and you get a lot more contact. During that, we had more than 500 people on the phone. I asked them a poll question: would you do one, put more money into education, cut your taxes, or put money into roads? More than half said, I would like to put money into education. Less than a quarter said, cut my taxes. So I think the voters may be shifting if we can show them we can actually manage things well. So I think it's incumbent upon Democrats and Republicans to show that we're actually good managers and that we're capable of working together.
Okay?
I heard a lot there. Tax reform is going to have to be done. Now, Larry's saying about a BRAC. I mean, they basically have that going on right now. The JLAC, it's the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. They're working on tax exemptions. You know, I think it's erroneous to say that, and I want to come back real quick to the higher education, that's the silver bullet. And we haven't treated the higher education system like an ATM. We treated the taxpayer like an ATM. When you look at the size of increases in our budget, it's the taxpayers paying for that. And then you have to ask yourself, and I apologize for this, Larry, but you're the one that's on the House Ways and Means Committee, so you can't point fingers and say to people, they took money away from higher ed. You took money away from higher ed, and now you want to come with a handout and say, could you please refund it for me? That's not going to work in the eyes of the public. And so what we have to do is put together a comprehensive package. That's one thing I do believe needs to be done, is it's going to have to focus on the economy. It's going to have to focus on streamlining tax system. I don't believe it's the most regressive tax system we have here. The income tax is off the table. I mean, the people have spoken several times on this issue. So if we're going to live in a dreamland that people are going to somehow tomorrow wake up and vote for that, that's not a plan. We need to put together a comprehensive plan that takes within current revenue streams and then appropriate them based upon priorities. And then after that, deal with the reforms necessary to clean things up. People don't want to give more money right now because of issues like the ferries that are not working correctly, because of inefficiencies in the school system, because of inefficiencies that we see in our DOT system. You know, when you spend an extra $1 million because someone didn't read the blueprints right down in Highway 16, people, that's $1 million. It may not seem like a lot to a politician, but that's a lot to Mrs. Smith, who's living out there on the street trying to make ends meet. And so they are not comfortable giving up more taxes right now. It's incumbent upon us as legislators to change the culture so that they do believe that we're responsible with that money, and then move forward with potential additional opportunities for them.
But realize, fundamental tax reform is not in the cards. Nobody's talking about it. None of the leaders on either House or Senate, Republican, Democrat, neither governor. What is on the table is whether or not we put more money into higher education. I'd say yes, we must, and what I'm trying to do now is develop that menu of options that says this will have such high payoff, and that rather than having these people on welfare or totally unemployed, homeless, this is what we need to do, is to feed those businesses in our state that are hungry for well-educated workers. That's the core decision we need to make as a state.
Yeah, let me ask a question here. The discussion today, right now, has been on a high plane, and we've been discussing broad issues. But let me bring it down to a local level. You two are representing a district. So, what burning issues specific to the district do you see that you're going to fight for in the legislature and try and get funding for, in spite of the budget crunch that we know that exists at this point? I'm talking about, to the voters of the district, what do you see as things that would directly impact them? What's the burning issues?
Myself?
Yes.
So three that stand out right away is I want to be a proponent for working on the toll system. I know Representative Angel has a bill on the table right now that's looking at the different ways we can deal with the bonding for that bridge. We fundamentally have to look at the way that we structured those bridge payments. People in our community, when I'm knocking on doors, are so frustrated with the way that the tolls have been dealt with. So my first focus is to deal with making sure at a very local level that we explore every opportunity within that bonding. I know we've been told we cannot do it, but I've talked to several people in the private sector who manage bonding, corporate and municipal bonding for years, and say that's not true. There are ways to do that. You may have to write some legislative laws to get around it, but we can refinance that. So that's one of the issues I think that we need to deal with immediately locally. Highway 302 has been on the drawing board for 20 years, and it needs to be dealt with, and I want to deal with it. And that's the highway right there, the Wanted Curves, if you're familiar with that, goes down to the Purdy, has a little narrow bridge there. The safety issue, obviously I'm a public safety guy being in the fire department. The safety issue there is paramount. We have to find funding to fix that this legislative session. And then third, I'm a huge proponent of working on the charter schools. I think that we need to get the charter school system implemented within the state so we can start fixing our K through 12 education system, find some innovative ways to do that.
So three specifics. It's a good question of what specific things in the district. On Highway 302, the specific thing needs to be done next is to choose one of the 4 routes that go across the top of Burley Laguna. So I've been working with the local community to see if they're ready that the community could actually choose which of those 4 routes so that we can go to Judy Cleburne and the Transportation Committee and say, this is what we want. Because right now, 302 is not on the list. And we're still stuck at this, we're hanging at top dead center, just simply waiting for DOT to eventually to choose one of those routes. On the bridge, the specific thing that we need to do, and I've already started the process with our staff, is to charter an outside estimate of the projections of bridge use. The problem with the bridge tolls is that we are running well under the original projections of use. DOT is giving us one set of projections which show that we keep marching up this very steep ramp. And at some point, and I think we're nearly there now or slightly past it, we're at the place where you simply can't keep going up that ramp. So if we can show that there is not going to be further growth out there in a credible outside study that's working for the legislature, then we can go in and renegotiate the deal. The toll bridge is 100% funded by tolls. It's the only mega project in the state that's been handled that way. So if we can show that we can't go further, then we can go in and specifically renegotiate that. And on education, the specific thing that I'm working with right now is we have a teacher named Corrine Borders, Dr. Corrine Borders, who's just been appointed by the Federal Department of Education to work, she's a middle school teacher out in Keepin and a science teacher. She is working on a national group of how we can fundamentally overhaul the way the schools work. So I've already launched a group of citizens building on my vitamin E project for the last 2 years, that we will, with teachers and citizens, try to rethink the creativity inside the classroom so that we account for who the kids are when they get to school, what the technology should be, and we get out of this crazy business of fighting this World War II battle about charter schools. What a silly discussion. It's only, of course we need innovation, but we're having all the adults in the state decide whether they do or do not want charter schools when we've got more than 2,000 schools that are not performing well. So I'm interested in specifically here in the district, seeing if we can come in from the side with a fundamentally more creative approach to how kids learn in the classroom.
Can I ask one more question? There's been a lot of talk about partisanship and legislatures marching in lockstep for or against legislation. So I'll ask both of you, are there any parts of the party platform, as you understand it now at this point, that you do not agree with? And would you be able to step outside that platform on issues such as gay rights or anything else, if you felt that was in the best interest and were advocated by your constituents?
I'm always independent. Nobody's platform owns my vote. And my voting record now, after 6 years, has got well over 10,000 votes to show that. Sometimes painful. You go ask the teachers union here, I was not with their line. I represent here a swing district that it has got a very large independent middle. And I represent Republicans and Democrats. In fact, the other day I was at the Tea Party meeting in Gig Harbor. I go to CAPO. I try very hard to represent everybody. So I take an independent, what is best for this district, these constituents, that fits my own conscience.
But what's something that your caucus believes in that maybe doesn't fit with what you feel your district believes in?
Well, a little one. This is the people in Seattle got all excited about plastic bags. Remember, they actually banned plastic bags in Seattle. I consider that so dumb. I mean, I'll give you a good example. I met with the Sierra Club. I am really frustrated with our environmentalists. I am a religiously zealous environmentalist. I worry about whether or not we're taking care of these waters and these lands well enough. I don't think so. And I have not seen from our environmental caucus the kinds of creative, system-wide actions that we need. To tell you a good example was the barrel tax. They wanted us to vote a $1.50 barrel tax of additional monies on all petroleum that was imported into the state, and that was going to be additional money, they said, the advocates, in order to increase stormwater runoff treatment. Well, it didn't have anything to do. Here we are with Art Castle in Kitsap as one of the leader in low impact development, pervious pavements, you know, and the money itself is actually being ripped off and put someplace else in the budget. So I firmly opposed for 2 years that barrel tax.
I would agree this is a swing district, and I am running based on the idea that I want to represent all the people, not just the Republicans or Democrats or independents. I mean, we have 137,000 people here. I want to represent every single one of them. I want to be an avenue for them to be able to achieve their goals and aspirations and dreams in life by being their connection to the state government. So I don't have any.
Are there any aspects of the Republican platform that you have issue with?
Absolutely. I've talked about a couple. I know there's been a lot of talk about privatizing the ferry system. I know that there are some private-public partnerships they talk about that I just don't think that the government can do. Let's talk about, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. There's some, let's see, some union issues, pensions, for instance. There's a good one as an example. I know that there's been talk about changing the pension system. Well, these are contracts with the people of our community. We gave them a benefit, well be it might have been in 1977 or 78 or 79, but we made contracts with them. And so we need to honor those contracts. And so I think if there's any changes, and there has to be changes to the pension system, the Pew research just came out and showed that we're completely underfunding our health portion of that. You look at the Seattle Times a couple weeks back, and they showed that we are got about a $5 billion pension hole. That's even shallow if you look at how they're doing the actuaries. But that doesn't mean we hurt the people who we've made promises to. That means we make structural reforms for here going forward, and then fund what we need to fund to make sure that we adequately prepare for our future. So those are a couple that I think are areas that I would want to work on a bipartisan basis.
No, would you be willing to go up against your caucus or your leaders if they want a unified opposition and you felt strongly the other way?
Absolutely, and I've done it before in the past. It's not unknown that I'm a firefighter here, right? I'm the union president of my battalion chiefs local. Was the union president of the firefighters local. You can't tell me that that's not a direct conflict with some of the what I would call Republican hard right base, and yet I'm willing to work with all people, union, non-union, tall, short, skinny, wide. My job is to represent everyone, not just the Republican Party. It just so happens that I was a small business owner. I have some personal convictions that lean me towards the Republican platform. But that doesn't mean that I don't represent everyone's views and everyone's ideas. That's the goal of representing.
Okay. We're just about an hour, but why don't we give you each 1 minute to close? If there was something that we missed, something that you'd like to say before we get done, we'll let Larry go first, then finish it up.
The primary results, to me, offer an opportunity to make the rest of the campaign, the general campaign, unusually substantive. I am looking, as I said at the outset, what really bothers me is that we are undereducated and not attacking that, and that the politics of the state have been angry and divisive. So, and our voters, the specific voters we've got here in the district, when we survey them and when you talk to them door to door, are really upset with politics and politicians. So what I'm hoping to do in the next 3 months is to really engage voters and bring them back into the political process, saying we will be heard. That's why I ran this telephone town hall, so it wasn't just a mailer they got. It was actually an interaction. They could hear each other talking. I will do more of those, and I will continue to work a great deal on education funding, this higher education game plan all across the state. So that's my agenda for the next, several months.
Well, I just want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to us again 2 years later. I am excited about the opportunity to represent the people of the 26th District as I've been out on the doorsteps. I've met families and people that I never would have known unless I got involved in the political process. And that gives me the passion to go out and represent them. And so I'm going to work hard. I told you before, it's about kids and the economy. I'm going to work hard to help our small business owners keep their doors open. I'm going to help our hardworking families be able to afford to put their kids through school, have a quality education that gives them the skills and the training necessary to achieve what they want to in life and compete in the global economy. And I'm going to work hard and diligently to make sure that we fund those things appropriately and we fund them first. I am going to work as hard as I can to make sure that the 26th District gets back up on its feet and moving forward again. So I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts with you. I appreciate the opportunity to sit and talk with you again, Larry.